When we talk about pharmaceuticals, temperature isn't just a number on a thermostat. It's everything. A tiny slip-up, just a slight nudge outside the required range, can lead to absolute disaster. So in this explainer, we're going to dive deep into the science and the strategy you need to master thermal management. Just let that sink in for a minute. 1 single degree. We're not talking about a power failure or some catastrophic event. We're talking about a tiny shift that can wipe out millions of dollars worth of product and, way more importantly, put the medicine patients are counting on at risk. It's a game where the margin for error is basically zero. So that's the big question, isn't it? How do you actually build a system that's tough enough to handle anything, from a sensor that's on the fritz to a crazy record-breaking heat wave? It sounds complicated, I know, but the solution really boils down to a clear, methodical approach. And here's that solution. It's not about buying one specific piece of gear or following a single procedure. It's what we're calling the 4-step shield, a complete, start-to-finish system that's designed for total thermal control. So here's our game plan. First, we're going to start with the bedrock, the math of calculating your heat load. Then, we'll get into the physics of how heat actually moves around inside your facility. After that, we'll cover how you prove your system actually works with thermal mapping. And finally, we'll talk about how you lock in that control and maintain it forever. All right, let's jump in. Step 1, calculating your thermal budget. You have to start here. This is the absolute foundation. Before you can even think about cooling a space, you've got to know exactly what you're up against. So what is a heat load calculation? Well, think of it as an audit of every single source of heat that gets into your building. It's not a ballpark guess. It's a careful, systematic process to figure out the total amount of heat your HVAC system has to fight and remove. And I love how this slide breaks it down. You can think of these as the 4 thieves constantly trying to steal your cold air. You've got the external load, that's the sun just baking your walls and roof. Then there's infiltration, all the hot air that sneaks in when a bay door opens. You've got the internal load from things like lights and machinery. And you can't forget occupancy. Yep, every single person in that building is basically a walking 100-watt heater. Now, after you've tallied up the heat from all those 4 thieves, you might think you're done, but you're not. This part is absolutely crucial. You have to add a safety buffer, a factor of about 10 to 15%. This isn't just a nice to have. It's your emergency fund for that once-in-a-decade heat wave. Without this buffer, that's when systems fail, product gets lost, and you have a regulatory nightmare on your hands. Okay, on to step 2. This builds directly on the first. We know how much heat we need to get rid of, but now we need to understand how the air itself actually behaves in a huge space like a warehouse. And trust me, it's not as simple as just cranking up the AC. It really just comes down to some basic physics we all learned in school, right? Hot air is less dense, so it floats up. Cold air is denser, so it sinks down. This incredibly simple principle has huge consequences for managing temperature in a tall building. And that simple principle leads directly to this, the stratification trap. In those big high bay warehouses, all that hot air rises and gets stuck up at the ceiling. And this can create a massive temperature gap. We're talking as much as 5 degrees Celsius hotter at the top rack than on the floor. If you're not planning for that, any product you store up high is in serious danger. Which brings us to step 3, the mandate for mapping. Okay, so you've done the math, you get the physics, but now you've got to prove it. Regulators like the FDA, they don't operate on assumptions. They demand cold, hard data. And this is where that data comes from. It's a formal study called thermal mapping. You literally place dozens, sometimes even hundreds, of tiny temperature data loggers all over your facility. And the goal is really simple. Find the absolute hottest and coldest spots in that entire space when it's running. And you can't just do it once. You need to get 2 completely different snapshots. The first is the empty study, which gives you a baseline of how the room behaves all by itself. But the loaded study, that's the real test, because as soon as you fill that room with pallets of product, you completely change how the air moves. This one shows you how your system really performs under pressure. Okay, this leads us perfectly into our 4th and final step, continuous monitoring. Mapping is fantastic, but it's like taking a photograph. It's just one moment in time. Your facility is running 24/7 all year long. You need a system that's like a security camera, watching it constantly. And that's where a modern environmental monitoring system, an EMS, comes in. This is your constant watch, and it does way more than just record the temperature. It sends you instant alerts, a text, an email, the second the temperature goes out of bounds. We call that an excursion. It also creates tamper-proof digital audit trails and lets you do really smart analysis, like calculating MKT. Let's talk about MKT for a second, because it's a real game changer. Mean kinetic temperature is not a simple average. It's a much smarter calculation that shows the total thermal stress a product has been under over a period of time. It gives more weight to higher temperatures, which makes it a way more accurate tool for judging product stability. Now, a critical piece of any modern EMS is being compliant with something called 21 CFR Part 11. What is that? Well, it's basically the FDA's rulebook for electronic records. It makes sure that your digital audit trail is secure, that it can't be altered, and that it's just as legally binding as a pen and paper signature. For any kind of regulatory inspection, this is non-negotiable. So, let's bring this all home. We've just walked through the 4 essential parts of a total thermal control system. As you can see, it's not any one thing. It's how they all work together. And here it is again, the whole shebang, the 4-step shield. You calculate the load, you understand how the heat moves, you prove it with mapping, and you maintain control with constant monitoring. You see how each step builds on the one before it? It creates this seamless, comprehensive defense for your products. Look, at the end of the day, this whole thing isn't just about ticking boxes for a regulator or some boring technical process. It's a shield. It's what stands between a safe, effective medicine and a multi-million-dollar write-off. It protects your product, it protects your company's profits, and it protects the health of every single patient who is depending on you. So I'm going to leave you with this question. You have the blueprint now. Take a second and really think about your own facility. Where's your biggest weakness? Your single greatest thermal vulnerability? Is it a heat source you never accounted for? A blind spot where you don't have a sensor? Because finding that weak spot, that's the first step to making your shield unbreakable.